Hello, it's Bob Wells here, and welcome to another episode of the Undercurrent Stories podcast. When you think of a genius, who do you think of? Probably like me, you think of Leonardo da Vinci, Einstein, Darwin. But what about you? How close are you to be a genius? What if there is a massive undercurrent to human intelligence that we completely missed? What if genius isn't a birthright but a skill? What if the gap between ordinary thinking and extraordinary memory is a lot smaller than you've been led to believe? My guest today is a Guinness World Record holder and a 6-time USA memory champion. But here's the exciting part. He wasn't born with a photographic memory. In fact, he used to forget things just like the rest of us. He built his extraordinary mind completely from scratch. He's Nelson Dellis, the brilliant mind behind the new book, Everyday Genius, Hacks to Boost Your Memory, Focus Problem Solving, and much more. So in our conversation today, we're going to look behind the curtain of the human brain, smash through your perceived mental limits, and unlock the hidden potential that is already sitting inside your head right now, just waiting to be awakened. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Hello and welcome to the show, Nelson.
Hey, thanks for having me. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Great to have you on. Now, you're based in the east coast of the US.
Correct. I'm in upstate New York. Mm-hmm.
Okay. I really enjoyed the book, Everyday Genius.
Thank you.
A pleasure to read. And I think I said before we started the interview, it's one of those books, it's like a work in progress. There's so much in it. And some of the hacks, like some of the mental math stuff, I found particularly interesting.
Yeah, thank you. It's a long time coming. I've written a couple memory books, which is my bread and butter. But I've always been fascinated in things that you can do with your mind that not many people can and don't realize that they actually are able to. So it's just a compendium of kind of all those curiosities and interesting things that are usually associated with geniuses, but that are actually learnable by anybody.
So to just tell us a bit about how you became interested in improving your memory and, then what drove you and inspired you to become a US memory champion?
Yeah, it's been almost 2 decades now, but my grandmother was suffering with Alzheimer's for a number of years. She passed away in 2009, and that's really the catalyst for all this. I was getting more and more interested in the brain and memory, just watching her go through her decline, her mental decline, and just fascinated that the mind could get to that place. And I was fearful for my own memory. Is this something that's going to happen to me down the road? Obviously, I was in my 20s, nothing to worry about just yet. But I wondered to myself, was there something I could be doing now at that point of time with my mind so that in the future I'd be in a better place and less likely to end up in her situation? And turns out that there are memory techniques, been around for thousands of years. In fact, it's a lost art. This is how people carried information with their societies, their cultures, their traditions. They were passed on orally and through memory. And I was very surprised to learn that at these memory competitions, everyday kind of people were doing these phenomenal feats of memory and winning these championships and setting records. All of them, if I did a bit of research, kept saying the same thing, that I had an average memory. I learned about these ancient memory techniques and I practiced. And that was really the first time I had heard about practicing memory. I know you can practice skills. I know you can practice, physical things like skateboarding or running and lifting weights and all that. But memory, like how do you even practice memory? And so I went down this rabbit hole. There's the memory championship, which really excited me because I'm a competitive guy. So I was like, okay, I'm going to learn this stuff. I'm going to train and wipe the floor with every competitor at these competitions, and the rest is history.
It's absolutely fascinating, really, because when I think most of us, like I said at the beginning, when we think of a genius, we think of somebody like Da Vinci, and we think that in some way they have just been born much more clever, shall we say?
Yeah.
So would you say that somebody like Da Vinci, Tesla, etc., they got where they got through the fact that they were able to do lots of practice?
Yeah. And I think even more important than practice is curiosity. If you look at Leonardo da Vinci's work and what kind of things that he was interested in and providing his insights to, it is very broad and wide-reaching. And it just speaks to the fact that he was just so interested and curious about everything, about how water moves, anatomy, art, music, right? And he was very proficient in a lot of those things, but at one point he wasn't. And through his interest and his curiosity, taught himself how to be knowledgeable in all those topics, or skillful in those abilities. And I think that's really what, when we look at genius, we look at the final, or not the final, but the later product, and we say, wow, they must have been born with this intelligence, this power to just know so much and to be quick and sharp and visionary. And I really think it comes down to being open, playful, curious, and putting the time in, frankly.
Yeah.
And I think that's, if you really look at a lot of these geniuses that I highlighted in my book, the ones that we accept as genius, there is a story to how they got to be labeled that genius. And I'm not saying I'm a genius. I really would play that down so hard if anybody called me that. But that's what would happen. People would see me do these memory feats and say, oh, wow, you must be a genius. You must be born with that gift. And I'd be the first to tell them, listen, no, I was not born with it. Actually, I had an average memory. I trained this. You can train this. It's actually a lot easier once you pull back the veil and see how I'm doing it. It does take a bit of effort, a bit of practice to get fast at it like I am, but I've done that work, and that's why you're able to maybe label me as genius, because it looks like something impossible, something that I can't do, that person saying that, when in fact they can. They just don't know how to do it, and they haven't put the time in yet.
What I found quite exciting about the book, a couple of things really. One was older people in particular, they perhaps might get a bit late. Not all of them by any means, but people as you get older, I think you probably get a bit lazier. It's very easy to subcontract your sort of thinking out to your phone. The other thing is, it's almost, your book is, and what you're doing is very much an antidote to what's happening with AI, I think.
Yeah. I mean, if you, obviously as you age, you slow down, you're more tired. Things consume more energy to do them. But, think about physical fitness, right? As you age and responsibilities pile up, you have children, and you're also aging, it's harder to move, right? Like you look at a staircase and you're like, well, this is when I was younger, I would just fly up this thing. But now I'm older, like I have to consider, like, at the end of this staircase, I'm gonna, you're at an airport and there's an escalator there or an elevator. You might say take the escalator and elevator, just to know that at the top of that floor, you're not going to be exhausted. And you look at the other side of that. It's like, well, okay, I can work on my fitness throughout my life, right? So that even at an older age, even though I am older and aging and maybe not as strong as in my youth, I might still be physically fit enough to walk a flight of stairs and not be out of breath, right? But we work on that. Otherwise, yes, you will get lazier and resort to the things that make it easier for you. Same thing with the mind, and especially now, there are so many tools out there that are outsourcing our thinking and doing it for us. And it's easy and it's fast and it's barely wrong, if ever wrong. Well, ChatGPT can be quite wrong sometimes. But that's only going to get more and more accurate, right? So the same idea here, right? Like we can keep outsourcing stuff. We can take those escalators, those elevators, and in a lot of cases, they are useful. Like imagine you're going up that same flight of stairs, but you got 3 bags that you're taking on this flight. Like it's going to be a lot of work to ferry those up. So yeah, you take the elevator, right? But in a lot of cases, you can just fly up that stairs if you're nimble and able enough. So same idea with mental loads. There's a lot of things we do in our everyday life that we should be doing with our own mind, for the sake of staying on top of this ability that we have, which is to think and to memorize and to create ideas, versus just always referring to the easy way, because otherwise our brains will atrophy and we will get older and lazier in our minds.
And some of the feats that you've mastered in becoming an American, the US memory champion. Can you give an example? I mean, one of the things I saw was you can memorize so many numbers in the correct order. I mean, how many numbers? If I gave you a list of numbers, and we probably won't do it now, but if I gave you a list of numbers, how many numbers could you sort of reinterpret for me?
Yeah. So to give you an idea, at the memory competition, they have a bunch of different events that test your memory. One of the events is memorizing numbers. So they just randomize a huge number. In different competitions, it's slightly different, the size of the number, the time you have, how it's presented on the page, whether it's visual or auditory. But typically, it's usually a single page with like 500 digits on it, separated in rows of either 20 or 40 digits. So just this massive page of numbers. And you got to memorize in usually 5 minutes is the speed numbers event. There's also
that's
longer.
500 digits, did you say?
Yeah, you have 500 digits.
Wow.
Right. And now most people can't do all of that, but they'll still do several hundred. When I was back first starting out, I think my first competition, I just discovered memory techniques. I trained myself to do 40 digits. And I thought that was insane. In 5 minutes, 40 digits, that's 4 phone numbers, at least in the US with area codes. Wow, I could say it forwards and backwards. Cool. But I trained myself to go all the way up to my best ever was like 405 digits in 5 minutes. And now even the record is, I think in international competitions, they have multiple pages now because the 500 was shattered. I think people are doing in the 700s now in 5 minutes, which is wild. And so that's one of the things that we train for these competitions. Nowadays I'm not as well practiced. It's not something I'm not competing anymore. So, but I could still in 5 minutes probably bang out 200 to 300 digits in the 5 minutes.
That's incredible. And what other exercises what other parts of the competition would you like to share with listeners?
Yeah, sure. What else? We have another exciting event is the speed cards. So they have us memorizing, a deck of playing cards in as fast a time as possible. And there's 52 cards. So you see these people flying through the deck, and then they're able to recite all 52 cards forwards and backwards. My best time for that was around in competition 40 seconds. The world record now is like 12 or something.
Oh, that's mind-blowing.
It's mind-blowing.
That
because
is ridiculous.
Most people can't even fathom thumbing through a deck in 12 seconds, let alone actually storing the information in their mind. What else? We memorize names and faces. So we got hundreds of headshots of people, first and last names. You got to remember their names. Poetry. Sometimes we're given poems. We got to memorize them line for line. What else? We have lists of words, all sorts of things. But, it's testing stuff that can be randomized and that people haven't seen before, right? It's not like, you got to recite the periodic table at a competition because that's not fair. Everybody would have a chance maybe to pre-learn that, right? So everything at a competition is always like random information. And the people
that do these competitions, Nelson, are there a certain demographic? Are they what percentage of male and female? What type of ages are they?
Good question. I'd say it's maybe slightly more male than female, but I think honestly, in my opinion, I think the females outperform the males. I often wonder if you see more males just because guys in general always just want to like prove that they're better than everybody else. Women are just like, I'm good at this. Why do I need to show this off? Or prove that I'm better than anybody. But there have been female champions. There have been male champions. In terms of age demographic, honestly, I've seen competitors all across the board. I think in the US competition, the youngest you can be to compete is 12. So I've seen people as young as 12 all the way up to people in their 70s or 80s. And in terms of winners, I'd say it's usually around the younger side, like people in their 20s, just because I think it comes down to how much time do you have to train, right? And I feel like people in their late high school, early college years can give a lot of time to that because they're supported in other means, usually, not always. But, listen, I won my last US Memory Championship. I won as a 40-year-old, which I feel like that was the most impressive thing I ever did because I had to do that with all my work commitments, a family of 4 kids, having to travel, with a lot of stress on my shoulders. So, it's really interesting to see that anybody at any age can train their mind and perform at a competitive level.
Well, that's great. So I'd like to talk about one or two of the examples that you give. And I think the first one I'd like to talk about, which I find absolutely fascinating, and I've been trying this, and I'll tell you about it in a minute, memory palaces. Could you just explain to listeners about memory palaces, please?
Yeah, so memory palace is this ancient concept that takes into play that our brains are really good at remembering spatial information. And if you can take information that you don't know, that you want to put in here, and attach it or link it to something that is already in here. And since we're good at remembering spatial information, and we exist in spaces that we know like the back of our hand, we're in them every day, like our homes, our office places, our schools, your commute to work, whatever. There's these spaces that exist in our world that we interact with all the time, and we essentially have them memorized, right? So if we can mentally visualize ourselves walking through those spaces, attaching associations to the things that we don't know to those things, anchoring them to them, when it comes time to remember them, all we have to do is think of the place and walk through it in the same way. And if it's memorable enough, you can pick apart the things that you laid there, which will help you remember what you placed there. That's essentially what it is.
Yeah, I mean, I tried. I had heard about them before, but I actually tried one recently, and I managed to sort of memorize 10 rooms in my house. And I listened to the BBC Radio 4 News, which goes on for about 10 minutes in the morning. And there's normally about 10 or 11 stories. And I was able to, by, shall we say, remembering something really silly about let's say we've got President Trump in the first one, talking to, I don't know, Elon Musk. The two of them, in a Tesla having a chat would be the first thing you'd see. So you remember that. And then I went through something, and I went right through the house. But the good thing about it is that not only do you remember what that headline is, but you actually seem to remember everything else that is narrated in that story by the reporter, which I found really fascinating. And you can do it in the order. So I thought that was an amazing thing that I would urge people to try. No doubt you would.
Yeah, and like you pointed out there, the phenomenal thing about Memory Palace is it preserves this order, right? So if you have it doesn't always have to be for using it for lists, but things that have some sequence to it. If you place it along this path, you start at the front door of your house for the first thing, then you walk in the entryway of your apartment or house. That's the next place. The TV room. You just kind of make a little pathway through your house. When it comes time to recall it all, you just walk through that path and you have the order, right? That's how we're able to memorize the full order of a deck of cards, because we're placing it in this sequence. Same with your stories from the news. If you wanted to remember those in order, you just follow yourself through the story and through the pictures. And, you can do that pathway forwards. You can walk through it backwards. You could even say like, hey, what was the fifth story? And you just have to mentally go to the fifth location. It was, something about the Strait of Hormuz or whatever, right?
Yeah.
It's a super powerful technique to just organize stuff you want to memorize, because that's really the problem with people saying that they forget things. It's not that they are truly having amnesia and forgetting everything. Sometimes, yes, you forget something and it's completely lost. You don't even know or remember it at all, or recognize it. But there's a lot of times where you forget it, but with a little bit of coaxing or maybe even a hint or somebody telling you the answer or the thing you're looking for, you'd be like, oh, yes, of course. You remember it suddenly. So what does that say? That says that the information is in there. You just couldn't get it, right? So it's a connection issue. It's an organization issue. You didn't place that information in a way that was easy or reliable to search up. And when you place things in a memory palace, you're essentially giving it a file cabinet in your mind so that it's easy to find all the information when you need it.
What about if I was to do the same thing tomorrow on tomorrow's news, and I used the same memory palace, and I wanted to remember today's news and tomorrow's news and perhaps the day after? Do I use the same memory palace? Can I still go back there? What would be the way to operate that?
Right. So that was the question I was going to ask you. So yes, you could use the same memory palace for the next day's news, but remember that you will have an echo of the previous day's news, right? And potentially could get crossed wires, right? You'd be like, oh wait, was that image from yesterday or for today? And you can imagine if you did this over and over again, things might get a little muddy. But you'll find that actually, as you use the same memory palace to rewrite new memories over them, at the beginning it'll be tough because it's such a powerful skill. It's hard to forget some things, but if you practice that, you actually will get good at erasing the information. That's what we do with our memory palaces for, say, deck of cards, I use the same ones often. And when I first started this, it was hard to erase them. I'd always think of the cards from before. But now I'm so used to just doing a new set over what I had there before, taping over it, and I don't have any problems. But to answer your question, what if you wanted to remember, every day news, or at least maybe say have a backlog of the last 7, right, or something like that, just to have a week's worth of news in your mind at all times. What I would do is set up a memory palace for that. So meaning, let's say I wanted 7 days of news stories, and there's 10 stories every day on this little BBC show. I need 70 locations, right? Or I could have seven,
right.
Yeah, or I could have 7 different little memory palaces of 10 locations, right? Or there's so many ways to be smart about how you use the space. So you could use the same memory palace, but maybe instead of where you place the other information, maybe it's on the ceiling of these locations, or maybe it's on the right-hand side or the doorway, right? So you can organize things if you're doing it by room, let's say. It doesn't even have to be by room. It could be by pieces of furniture too. It's how you kind of interact with the space that makes it unique, right? But yes, I would, if you know the plan of what you're going to store and the amount of information it will actually end up being, you can create a memory palace specifically custom sized for that.
So somebody like yourself as a memory champion, how many memory palaces have you got?
Yeah, I get this asked a lot. I often answer, I've never really counted them. I should, but I would say around 100.
Wow.
And there are all sorts of different sizes. I mean, I have, for cards, I need ones that are lengths of 17 locations, because the way I compress the cards, I just need 17 images. But then, I've done these massive projects where I've memorized thousands of digits of something. And so those memory palaces are hundreds of locations long, right? I even have memory palaces that are like 5 locations long, very short, but also long ones. So it's a variety.
Mental maths, that was a particularly interesting one. And, we're taught when we go to school to do a lot of these mathematical solutions and go from right to left. But you're saying go from left to right, which I found very interesting.
Yeah, especially if you're doing it mentally. The way we read obviously is from left to right. So it's always kind of backwards when you're trying to do some calculation and you're working from the back end, but you have to say the answer from the front end, right? So if you're calculating from the right to the left, you've got the pieces, you got to remember them, and for a short answer, I guess that's maybe not a big deal, but if it's a larger sum or arithmetic, you got to remember all those digits and then start from the other end. So why not start calculating from the front? There's this question of, well, what if you encounter like a carry or something like that? Well, yeah, you get good at kind of looking ahead to see if there will be an anticipated carry. And then you can factor that in as you're saying the answer. It is a bit of a learned skill, and it is a bit awkward at first, because most of our lives, most of us have just gone right to left. So saying it left to right is a bit of a weirder feeling, but it once you get into it, you see how natural it feels, because that's just how we will say the answer, right?
And I'd say divisions. If you went into a restaurant and there were 7 people and the bill came to, I don't know, $371, and you wanted to divide it, how quick could you do that?
Let me see. 371 divided by 7?
Yeah.
I think it's 53. 53? I don't know. I'd have to check that. I think that feels right.
So what? It is, yeah.
Yeah. So, and what's happening
See,
right?
For me, that is quite impressive. That's something you can use in everyday life, and people,
Yeah, but what happens? I mean, the thing with division, that one actually we do, if you're taught the conventional way, you are doing it actually from left to right. That's one of the only simple operations that we do with simple arithmetic that we do from left to right. Go figure, right? But if you try to visualize that, let's try it together, right? So you have this, and here's where you have to really try it, and this takes practice too to do this. But imagine in front of your mind you have like a whiteboard with the number 371. There it is, right? Yeah. And you're trying to put 7 into that, okay? So we know the process of long division, right? You draw the little bar over the number and you have the 7 in front of it. And you first say, okay, does 7 go into that 3? No, it's too small, right? So then you have the next number, the 37 I'm looking at, right? Does 7 go into 37? Yes, it does. I know 35. It can go up to 35, right? That's 5 times. 5 times 7 is 35. So I know at the beginning, my first digit is a 5. So, this is all mental. So you're kind of holding a lot of digits in your mind, and this does take a bit of practice to get good at. But what you can do when it's you're saying the answer is you can already start to say 50, right? Or even 5 if you just want to say the first digit is 5, right? So you don't even have to like hold anything else because you're saying the answer. You can say 5, right? And then what you're doing, you have the 37. You now know that 7 times 5 is 35. So you can imagine there's a 35 under the 37. You do the little subtraction. There's a 2. And then we bring down the 1. So now I have a 21. How many times does 7 go into 21? 3, right? And then we're done, right? So I can put the 3 at the top, or I can just say 50, and then now I say the 3, right?
Yeah.
That's all it happening in slow-mo.
Yeah.
But with a bit of practice, right, you can actually get quite fast at that.
Yes. And it is definitely practice, isn't it? Which is...
And one thing I mentioned in that chapter is this idea of number sense. That's what I opened the chapter with, that some people might be able to even do that division problem way faster than me. I'm not claiming to be the fastest, but I can do it in my mind if I want to. And I like that I have that ability if I choose to do it. Obviously, it can be stressful, put on the spot and stuff, but if you practice, it gets better. But this idea of number sense is that a lot of people are just scared of numbers or think they're more complicated than they are. But they're beautiful and they are super fun to interact with. And, different people grow up with different number senses, and it's hard to pinpoint like where someone's fear of numbers or confidence with numbers comes from. Maybe it's you just had the right math teacher in the right grade year, right? That gave you the confidence, or that scared you away, right? But that should have nothing to do with the fact that numbers are things that we can all master. And so building up that number sense is important, like understanding the relationships with numbers and being able to play with numbers and see them in different ways. And that only comes by giving them a chance and playing with them and seeing them and trying things out.
Some of the other little hacks that you might want to mention, which I found very useful, miles to kilometers, for example, and the other way around, that's pretty simple, isn't it, to do?
Yeah. And remind me, in the UK, you guys are using miles, right?
We still use miles, yes. Yeah, we're a bit mixed up in the UK. We're a metric country, but we still use miles.
Sorry, go ahead.
And if you're a builder and you want a bit of timber, you'll ask for a 4.8 meter length of 2x4.
Okay,
you'll mix it together.
That's interesting. Yeah, I was just in Ireland, and it feels it's the first time I was in Ireland. It feels very British. Obviously, it looks the same, and obviously you guys have different accents, but they're using kilometers. I was like, what? Why? I don't get it. And I guess in Northern Ireland, they would use miles, right?
I would guess so, yeah. The fact that Southern Ireland's very much part of Europe now.
Yeah. Anyways, so the simple way to convert, miles to kilometers is you have miles and you want to multiply by 1.6. That's the factor. It's a little more precise than that, but that's good enough, right? And if you think about it, how accurate do you need to be, right? Oftentimes we're just trying to calculate something off the cuff in our mind. If we have a rough, close estimate, that's good enough, right? So you could even get away with saying it's multiplied by 1.5, 1.5, right? Which is, if you think about it, not that hard to do, right? If something is 1.5 times the other thing, all you got to do is take the original number and add half to it, right? So if I have 10 miles in kilometers, if I was to do a rough estimate, multiplying by 1.5, I take the 10, find half of that, that's 5, and just add it back to my original number. So 10 plus 5. So 10 miles is roughly 15 kilometers, right? Now, if you want to be a little more accurate, because it's actually 1.6, not 1.4, 1.5, you could add an extra 10% of your original miles to that answer, right? So I do 1.5, so I got 15, but my original number was 10, and finding 10% of any number is really just moving the decimal over 1. So 10% of 10 is just 1. So it's not 15 miles, it's 16, right? It's not 15 kilometers, it's 16 kilometers. So 10 goes to 16, right?
And then you were talking in one of the chapters about various techniques to learn, and there were two that I particularly like. One was the Feynman technique, and the other one was the lightner system for flashcards. And I think that both those would be quite useful for students or anybody at any stage of life if they want to learn something. Could you just elaborate on those, please?
Sure. So, I have a whole chapter on memory techniques. It starts off with that. And then later on, there's a chapter on how to study and learn things better, which is essentially an extension on memory techniques. But really what it comes down to when you want to remember things or really learn something is review, right? You have to study the information and basically force your brain to develop these familiar pathways to the information, right? That's how we get to know something, right? Is when it's just like instant and we don't even think about how we know it, right? And that's through massive amounts of rehearsal, which doesn't sound fun, but unfortunately that's the way our brains work. If you want to know something forever and just know it without having to look it up, this idea of procedural memory or muscle memory, where you just have this snappy answer and you don't know where it comes from, that takes review, right? So there are a few ways to go about this that kind of conceal what you're doing there, which is essentially reviewing stuff, rotely repeating things. But the Feynman method is a great way, and it was that name was coined by the late famous physicist Richard Feynman. He's a phenomenal guy. I highly recommend people reading up on him. He has some phenomenal books that are so fun to read and are accessible. He's a physicist, but you wouldn't feel like you're talking to a physicist because he has a way of communicating where anybody can kind of understand what he's saying, even though he's talking about something kind of complicated. But that's the idea behind the Feynman method is you take the thing that you're trying to master or learn and you explain it to somebody else. You can even do this to yourself in a mirror. It doesn't actually have to be to somebody else. But the idea is that as you explain what you've supposedly mastered, or convince yourself that you've mastered or learned, you will realize that, and you're trying to explain it to somebody who knows nothing about it. So you're trying to really dumb it down or simplify it without any edge cases or things that people might be like, well, wait, I don't understand. What do you mean by that? Right. And inevitably, that's the response you might get is like, well, what does that mean that you just said? And then you would have to explain that. Right. And the point of it is that you're rehearsing how to kind of analyze what you actually know. And what you might be left with is like, oh, shoot, I know this, but I don't quite know how to explain this piece. Or I explained this piece kind of weak, and I should go back and further study that. So it's a good way to kind of see realistically what you know, because we're terrible at knowing what we know. I think we have an overconfidence of thinking we remember things. You'd be like, oh, yeah, I'll remember that, when in fact you probably won't. Or like, I get it. I truly understand it. And then when you're, pen to paper, you're in an exam, you're like, oh, shoot, I actually don't know it. Or I thought I did, but I didn't know it as deeply as I wanted to or thought I wanted to. So the Feynman method kind of opens that up. The other system or method is the Leitner system or the Leitner box. And this is basically an analog review system, flashcard system, where you can create boxes. And there's different ways you can do it. I recommend in my book to create 5 boxes. And there's box 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And the idea is that you make these analog flashcards for what you're trying to learn deeply, and you place them all in box 1. And on day 1, you go through each flashcard, and if you know it, then you advance it to box 2, right? If you don't know it, it stays in box 1, right?
So you have the word or the subject on one side, and then the quick explanation on the other one, like a traditional flashcard in study.
Traditional, yeah. Nothing special about it, other than, and depends on what the information is, but let's say it's like foreign language words or something like that, where you have on one side the foreign word, on the other side you have the definition, right? And you're testing yourself. You look at the foreign word, do you know it? There might be also like you don't know it, or there might be like, oh, hold on, I almost know it. So all the things that you know instantly moves to box 2. Then the next day you go through box 1 again, whatever's left there, right? And then box 2 as well. If you know the thing in box 1, it goes to box 2. The things in box 2 that you know go into box 3. If you went through box 2 and got some wrong, back to box 1, right? And so essentially, and there's a whole pattern of when you review box 1, box 2, box 3, box 4, the ones that are later get reviewed less because it's stuff that you are getting to know more and more. And then obviously by the time you get to box 5, which is the goal, get everything in box 5, that stuff doesn't need to be reviewed as much. And by the end of the period of doing a Lightning box, which usually you could do like a 30-day box sequence, most of the stuff in box 5, you may not have to touch, for months, right? And it should still be there. So I always think that, of course, there's all sorts of digital tools to do flashcards and review processes, but I think having an analog version of it is so much more powerful because you interact with the information. I think any chance you can use your hands and your mind rather than having a digital tool do it for you, you're going to remember it more.
I had a quick go at it, and I think it's nice to actually touch something and actually feel yourself doing some physical work that then contributes to what you're trying to get in your head.
Exactly. Yeah.
The other one I wanted to ask about was, most of us, myself included, we meet people, we're introduced to them, and you think you remember them, the name, you see them again, you can't remember the name, and you've got a little bit about remembering names.
Yeah.
What would a genius or an expert be? What sort of methods have you got for remembering people's names?
Yeah, I mean, so before even going to the technique, I think understanding why it's so important to memorize someone's name helps with the process, because if you see the value and the importance of a thing, your mind suddenly lights it up and says, you know what, this is at the top of my priority list here. I'm going to pay more attention to it. And even just that alone, you probably will remember things more by highlighting it like that. Because effectively, we all love to be remembered, right? It's our name. It's attached to everything about us and who we are in this one word. And so when someone goes out of their way to remember it and to say it to you, and you hear your name said to you by somebody else, we light up. It's such a powerful experience. As Dale Carnegie says famously, that it's the sweetest sound to our ear is our name. And it means a lot, right? And so whether you're trying to build friendships, make connections and network for work relationships, it may seem like a small thing. And, usually people forgive if you forget their name. It's not a big deal, right? When you do the opposite and remember it, it's a huge deal. It's subtle, but it's huge. There's a book that I was just reading, and somebody quoted, it's all about warfare on Mars. But one of the quotes in it was like, if you forget a man's name, he'll forgive you. But if you remember a man's name, he'll, fight for you forever, kind of thing.
It's very true. Yeah.
Yeah. And so anyways, if you just look at a name being that valuable, I guarantee you now when you meet people, you will think of it that way and be like hyper aware, paying attention. Now, if you add memory techniques on top of that, it becomes this whole other game where it's even more impossible to forget a name. And what we do is I say we, memory athletes, people who train this, we hear a name, it's a word, right? Or we see a name written down somewhere, and we convert it into a picture, an association, right? It's easier to remember a picture than it is to remember the actual jumbling of letters that you see before you. That is this name thing. So if I hear a name, Bob, very common name, you might think of somebody else with that name, Bob. I don't know, Bob Saget. There's that movie, What About Bob? I might think of that. I don't know. There's all sorts of ways your mind could go, and everybody's going to be an individual in that sense. So whatever association comes to mind, whether it's a person with that name that a character from a show or a movie, a famous person, go with it. Or maybe it reminds you of a thing like Bob. I think of maybe like a bobby pin, right? Or bobbing for apples, right? That game you used to play as a kid where you're dunking your head to bob out some apples, right? Or just a sea bob, like these floating bobs in the water, right? And let's say you don't know anything for the name. Maybe it's a more complicated name like, I don't know, Natasha. Maybe that's not that complicated, but maybe you don't know any Natashas. Nothing's coming to mind. What can you do? Well, you can always break a name down into smaller syllables and eventually have these small atoms that can be associated to something simple like Natasha, Nat. I think of like maybe like tying a knot, right? Just simple associations, right, to help cue the word.
Or a little fly.
Right, like a gnat. Yeah, that's like pestering you. Sure. Yeah. So you have a picture for the name. Then what? Well, we have to do what we did with the memory palace, where we link or anchor information to something we already know. right? Because the whole big problem that I referenced earlier is not that we forget the name, it's just that we can't recall it, right? So we got to place it somewhere or have a method, a structure, an organizational method to pull the name out when we need it. So what if we attached it or anchored it to a feature on the person's face, right? When you meet somebody, you're looking at them. When you see them again, you're probably looking at them. And they more or less carry all the features that they have with them along the rest of their life. Sure, people change, but ultimately they essentially have the same features, right? So I might look at somebody and say, like, oh, they have this mole here. That's the feature I noticed. So I'm going to take this gnat, this annoying little bug, and imagine it like picking at that mole, right? It's just like won't go away. I'm looking at this woman in the face, and Natasha is just.
You have to be quite creative as a memory expert, don't you? In your thought.
Yes. Well, it does come down to a lot of creativity, which again is learned. I feel like I was somewhat creative going into this, but I've come along miles and can come up with these kinds of things on the fly. So yeah, it's always come up with a picture, attach it or link it to a physical feature. And then the last step, which is important, is to review. So once I do that process, I will use the person's name, say it back to them, introduce them to someone else and be like, oh, Natasha, nice to meet you. This is my friend, Joe. Or Natasha, tell me more about blah, 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 right? The one piece of advice I will give you is please don't share the image you've just created with the person. It can often lead to awkward interactions.
Yeah. You sort of hit a note there when you first started talking about why it's so important for somebody to remember somebody's name. Yeah. And there's a bit there's one chapter where you're talking probably about more of the soft skills, empathy and stuff like that, the social skills. And I think it was quite nice to have that in there because from what we've been talking about so far, it's quite sort of mathematical and all the rest of it, whereas you do spend quite a bit of time on that.
Yeah, I wanted to try to cover most of the things that people associate with genius. And I think I would have missed out if I didn't touch on social genius. There's people who are maybe not that technically smart and can't crunch numbers or memorize a deck of cards, but you know what? They can talk up a storm. They can bring a room together. They can get all eyes on them. They can make people feel like $1 million. What is that? And people will be like, wow, that person, there's something special about them. They got something. They're a genius, just like anybody else might be, with more technical skills. So, and listen, I'm not the most socially savvy guy, but in fact, I struggle a lot with social anxiety and being confident in myself in front of others. But I've worked on it. I have a career now where I have to face people and speak to audiences and do some pretty scary things up on stage. With my memory that could easily be embarrassing. And I've definitely had my embarrassing moments, but a lot of people come talk to me. I have to remember names. So I have had to learn how to be more social and try to understand what makes people tick, what gets people's attentions, what makes people remember you, right? Obviously being in the memory business, that's important to me as well. And how to remember people that I meet too.
Yeah, I think one of the good examples of somebody who was almost like a social genius, and I've heard this from a number of sources, is Clinton, former President Clinton.
I was going to say that. Yep.
Were you?
Yeah, he's actually met him last year for the first time. And
oh, did you?
Yeah, he was a close family friend of ours passed away, and he went to college with them, was close to them. So he actually spoke at their funeral and was at the wake and everything. I had like 2 minutes with him, but I introduced myself and my mom did as well. And such a charismatic guy, even at his older age. But you always hear that story that he remembered everybody's name. Such a charismatic guy. And that's something not to shove under the rug. It's definitely a type of genius.
Yeah. Towards the end of the book, you almost put a caveat in when you start talking about some of the more, and I put it in quotes here, woo-woo stuff, which people might consider it. And I found that quite fascinating. And I wondered if you could just talk about remote viewing, because I wasn't sure what remote viewing was.
Yeah. And thanks for bringing it up. I love to talk about it. It is kind of a fringe topic, hence why I put it at the end of the book, just so that it wouldn't, set the tone for the book. Although I think it's an important thing to include in the book because it is, this this part of our mind that I think there's something there. I personally think there's something there. I'm not saying that like we're all psychics and can predict lottery numbers and stuff like that, winning lottery numbers, but I think there is some level of a quality in our brains that we don't know what is happening when something curious or smart or intuitively happens. And I think a lot of us have these experiences where we tap into something and we're like, what was that? Was that a fluke? Was that coincidence? Like a flow state, or predicting something and thinking, oh, that's a bit of a coincidence. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe it wasn't. I don't know. Anyways, this remote viewing thing, I stumbled into the world of it almost by accident. The story's in the book, but it's, there've been government programs since the 70s, maybe even before, that trained people this protocol called remote viewing, which is essentially a step-by-step process to intuit things that aren't perceivable by our normal senses because they're not in a perceivable space, right? So, for example, back in these programs, and this is all declassified, you can go to the CIA website and search remote viewing and you will see all that was out there. But people would be remote viewing for the government and finding, missing persons or downed airplanes halfway across the earth, or look into, during the Cold War, Russian silos to see that there were submarines there, right? Nuclear submarines, stuff like that. And you think, well, how is that even possible? Like, how can they do that with their minds? And I'm not claiming I know how it works, but I was put in a program to learn it and train it. And at first I was very skeptical. I thought, this is so ridiculous. What am I doing this? This is absolutely silly. Be a good story, but it's silly. Doesn't work. And then I would have these hits that were so close, eerily close. Like I'd get goosebumps how accurate it was, and it shouldn't have been. And it was. And then I kept having these experiences over and over again that I could predict under these controlled settings to a pretty accurate degree what was being hidden from me on the other side, right? I'm trying to view basically information about something that I have no information about given to me. And so in the book, I talk about how to do the process that I was taught. I encourage everybody to try it because there will be mixed results. It won't be like you're guessing, exactly the thing, but you might hit on some notes or some themes that are in the thing that you're trying to visualize and get information about. And then you can practice this and actually get better at it. And that's what I talk about in the book.
And what type of exercises or examples did you do when you were doing this experiment?
Yeah. So typically how a remote viewing session works is there is someone called a tasker who will assign a random number, truly random, has no meaning other than being a random number. They'll assign that number to this task. And the task, at least in my training, was a photograph of something, anything. I don't know what it is. There's no information given other than it's an image of something. And I have to describe this image. And so with that task number, I sit down, I take that number, and I put all my intent and my intuition into that number. And I allow the information that just comes to me to go down on paper, right? So what am I hearing? What am I seeing? What colors come out? What dimensions am I feeling, sensing? And the whole thing behind intuition is you have to let go of logic. You have to quiet that logical mind, which is hard, very hard. That's often what the skill is to quiet that. Because, when you quiet the logical mind, the sound of, this is so weird to say, the sound of the universe comes through, and that's what we're trying to connect with, the signal of that. And there's a lot of information there that we pick up on and we don't know how we're getting it. And so, even if you think about the idea of just putting your pen to paper and writing anything that comes to mind without thinking, something will come out. You will put something on paper. So what is that thing that you're putting on paper, right? Especially if you have quieted that logical mind. So when you do a remote viewing session, you start with these basic sensory things that just come to mind. Oh, pink. I'm feeling pink here. Orange. Oh, like a box-shaped thing with sharp edges. Crumbling. Oh, it's an emotional. I feel like it's like kind of disturbing. You're writing all these things down. And what will happen is if you're very new to this, your logical mind will creep in and be like, oh, you know what? That sounds like, I don't know, like, oh, you're talking about a car. You're defining a car here. So your mind always is trying to name things. And that's the whole opposite of what you're trying to do with remote viewing, because as soon as you name things, you're losing the thread, right? Because your logical mind is taking over. And that's not where this stuff comes from, whatever it is. So you have to learn how to quiet that and be like, okay, sometimes we say it's an AOL, an analytical overlay, when you see a specific image like a car. And I will write down car, put my pen down, take a breath, and then go back to trying to leave it out of my mind, right? And so a lot of these sessions you'll see are very descriptive, but they're not very specific as like, this is what it is. You say things like what the colors are, what the feelings are, what the structures are like. And then somebody in the task, you give that information to them as a judge, and they can piece together what you're describing. And then you're shown the photograph afterwards, and you can judge yourself on how close you were to that thing. And sometimes it's a miss. You're just like, 1 out of 10, terrible.
Yeah.
Not even close, Like you drew, the box, that had like little shapes on it, whatever, that were pink or whatever. But then you look at the photo and it's a green, lush landscape of a castle in Scotland or something. You're like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
But you can also look at that and be like, well, you know what? Maybe not a 1 out of 10. The box structure, okay, yeah, the kind of disturbing feeling, maybe there's a history in that castle, right, that I was tapping into. So maybe I give it a 2 out of 10, right? Because maybe some notes I hit on. But then you'll have other sessions, and this has happened to me countless times, where you draw the thing that it is. And I talk about that in the book, where one session that really changed my mindset on all of this is that there was an image given to me of a whale breaching. And I essentially drew the thing, and I described it exactly without saying it was a whale breaching.
Yeah.
But I said it was a life form, that there was blubber, there was water dripping off of this thing because it was making a splash in the photo, that there was kind of like gloomy atmosphere, a lot of grays. There were a lot of other things that I described. And then when I drew my sketch, it was literally this blob coming out with fins or extensions that were coming out. Those were the fins out of some kind of wet surface. And so when you look at that, even though I wouldn't say that's a 10 out of 10, I was definitely like, well, that's definitely like a 6 or a 7 out of 10. There was something going on because of all the photos in the world that it could have been. I did that. That's odd.
That's pretty good. I must just say, when you were earlier in that little bit of conversation, when you were talking about, you were thinking of something, you came up with car. I was thinking of car as well. But,
coincidence?
It could have been a house. Well, maybe, or could have been a house or something. But I thought, spooky. So, subject for the next book then, perhaps?
Yeah. No, I wanted to put a little bit of it in my book because I'm very passionate about it, and it was a very curious thing to explore the mind. But I wanted to see how people took that, and it's quite polarizing, honestly. Some people have said, like, I wouldn't have bought your book if I knew that chapter was in there. But I've had actually more people than I thought come to me and be like, I want to read more about that last chapter. Are you going to write a book about that last chapter? So maybe.
No, I thought it was fascinating. Where can people find out more about what you do, Nelson?
Yeah, my website, nelsondellis.com, has pretty much everything there. I'm pretty active on YouTube as well. If you search my name, you'll see my channel. There's tons of videos that are very nice as an introduction to these topics. And I'm on Instagram. If you just search my name, Nelson Dellis, you'll find me. But yeah, I've for coaching, for memory, one-on-one coaching, I have some online courses as well, and obviously my books as well. So there's plenty of content out there for people to learn and consume and start working on their memory and their genius.
Well, Nelson, this has been a really great conversation. It's an inspiring book. I would urge everybody to pick up a copy if they can, whatever age. There's something in there for everyone. Tips and advice, a lot of what you've heard on the in the episode. And I would say you're never too old to learn something new.
I agree.
My guest today has been Nelson Dellis. Nelson is an author of the book Everyday Genius, and you can find a link to Nelson's work and the book in the show notes. Thank you for coming on the show, Nelson.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.